They said no man alive could look into his eyes without trembling. For weeks, he sat locked in that iron cage, a beast the mountains themselves seemed to have spat out. Children were dragged from the square when he moved, women whispered prayers, and even the bravest men crossed the street to avoid his shadow. He was the mountain man, the name alone, enough to freeze blood. No one knew his story. No one dared to ask. They only feared what he might do if the cage ever opened. But then, she appeared, a widow, dressed in black, with nothing left in this world but the silver ring still clinging to her finger. While others recoiled in fear, she stepped forward. While the town cursed his name, she raised her hand, and in front of the sheriff, in front of the entire town, she did the unthinkable. She offered her wedding ring, her last memory of the man she lost to by the one they all called a monster. And in that moment, silence fell across the square. What happened next would shake an entire town, and change both of their lives forever. The townsfolk had never seen anything like it. In the heart of that mountain settlement, where log cabins stood with smoke curling from their chimneys and fear carried heavier than the winter winds, there was a cage, and inside it sat a man who was less legend, more shadow, and entirely terrifying. He was called the Mountain Man not because anyone knew his name, but because he was said to belong to the wilderness itself. The trees whispered about him, the rivers carried his secrets, and those who dared speak of him at night spoke with trembling lips. He sat behind thick iron bars, hands scarred, beard wild, eyes burning like coals that never cooled. Children were dragged off the street when their eyes lingered too long, and women crossed themselves before daring to glance his way. Men, hardened by frontier battles, would not stand close to the cage. They kept distance, as though even steel could not contain what crouched inside. Stories wrapped around him like chains heavier than the ones clamped to his wrists. Some said he had torn men apart with his bare hands. Others whispered he had made deals with spirits in the caves, that the wolves of the mountains obeyed his whistle. And still others claimed he had killed, not for survival, but for pleasure. No one truly knew, but no one dared ask. The sheriff had captured him weeks ago, though how he managed it no one could say. He strutted through the saloon boasting about the fight, but the bruises on his jaw and the silence in his eyes told another story. The mountain man had allowed himself to be taken, or so it seemed. Now he waited in that iron cage in the center of town, and every day people gathered, not to mock him, not to spit at him, but to stand at a distance and shiver. He did not speak, he only stared, and that stare was enough to hollow out courage from the bravest soul. But then came the day that changed everything, the day she walked into the square. She was a widow, known by her black dress and the silver band still resting on her finger. Life had already taken much from her. Her husband had been lost to a mine collapse 2 winters before, leaving her with nothing but debts and silence in the home where laughter once lived. The town pitied her, but pity never put food on a table. She carried herself quietly, never looking for sympathy. Yet when her steps echoed on the boards of the square that day, the entire town turned to watch. Her eyes, soft yet unyielding, fixed on the cage. She didn't falter like the rest. She didn't hide her gaze. The widow stood there, face pale, against the shadow of the mountain man, and for a moment it seemed as though even the wind stopped to listen. The sheriff smirked. "Best keep your distance, ma'am," he drawled, tipping his hat. "That beast don't take kindly to stares." But she didn't move. She only drew her hand to her finger, twisting the silver ring that had never left it. The town gasped when she slid it free. That band was the last thing she owned of her husband, her vow, her memory, her anchor to the life before grief. And then, with a voice that carried more weight than a dozen rifles aimed at the cage, she said, "I want to buy him." The words sliced the air. Silence slammed across the square. A child whimpered and was hushed. Men blinked as though they hadn't heard right. Women clutched their shawls, and inside the cage, for the first time in weeks, the mountain man moved, his head tilted, slowly, like a wolf scenting prey or perhaps recognizing something lost. The sheriff's smirk cracked. By him he barked a laugh, but it didn't echo long. "Lady, this ain't no horse at auction. Here's a killer, a monster. He don't get bought, he gets hanged." But the widow stepped closer, closer than anyone had dared. The chains rattled as the mountain man shifted his weight, watching her with eyes that burned hotter now, sharper, alive, yet she didn't flinch. She held out the silver ring, her hand steady though her heart thundered. "This," she said, "is all I have left. and I offer it for him." Gasps erupted around her. A miner spat in the dust. "She's lost her mind," another hissed. "Trading her husband's ring for that." But her eyes never left the cage. She wasn't bargaining for madness. She was bargaining for something deeper, something only she seemed to see. The sheriff scoffed, scratching his jaw. "And what would you do with him if I let him go? Invite the devil into your parlor?" Her lips pressed together, and though her voice was soft, it struck like a hammer. Sometimes devils are men that no one bothered to understand, and sometimes cages hold the only soul who still remembers how to fight for something true. The mountain man's eyes flickered, just once, as if a storm rolled behind them. The townsfolk murmured. Fear gnawed at them, but curiosity, that dangerous flame, began to lick at their doubts. Why would a woman with nothing risk the only treasure she had left on the man they all feared most? The widow lowered the ring into her palm, gripping it tight. "If you'll not take coin, then take what binds me to a past that no longer breathes. This ring is my last chain. I break it for him." The square was so silent then. The creak of the cage door in the wind sounded like thunder. The sheriff looked at her, then at the mountain man, then back at the ring. His pride wrestled with greed, with doubt, with something he wouldn't name. And in that clash of silence, the mountain man finally moved forward. His eyes locked, not on the sheriff, not on the crowd, but on the widow. And in that unspoken stare, the world seemed to pause, because in her gaze was no fear, and in his was something no one had ever dared believe he could feel. Recognition. The widow's gaze held steady, and the mountain man's unflinching eyes bore into hers. In that silent exchange, something shifted. It was as if the cage wasn't made of iron, but of secrets, and she alone held the key. The sheriff cleared his throat, trying to break the moment, but the air was heavier than his authority. He spat into the dust. "Lady, you don't know what you're asking." This man spilled more blood than a slaughterhouse floor. "That ring won't save you when he breaks free." But the widow's voice didn't waver. "Then let him take my life if he chooses. At least I will have given it freely, not cowering in fear." The crowd gasped. Some called her mad, others cursed under their breath, yet no one could look away. The sheriff, cornered by his own pride in the eyes of the townsfolk, finally sneered. "Fine, give me the ring, and may your God have mercy." She pressed the silver band into his palm. His fingers closed around it, greedy, though his smirk didn't hide the unease in his eyes. With a jerk of his head, he signaled the deputies. The heavy lock clicked, and the cage door creaked open for the first time since the mountain man had been dragged inside. The crowd held their breath. The mountain man stepped forward, chains clinking against his wrists and ankles. His shoulders were broad, his presence towering, his very breath like the growl of some ancient beast. He could have lunged, could have torn the sheriff apart in seconds, but he didn't. His eyes never left the widow. The deputies drew their guns, fingers twitching, but the sheriff raised his hand. "Let's see how long this fool's gamble lasts." The mountain man stopped before the widow, towering above her. The hush of the crowd deepened, as though the world itself leaned in to listen. Slowly, he bent his head forward, not in attack, but in something closer to acknowledgement. The chains rattled as his hands lowered to his sides, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, like stones grinding together. "You broke your chain for me. Why?" The widow's eyes softened, though her voice carried for all to hear. "Because sometimes the most feared man is the most forsaken. And sometimes, what others call a monster is just a man no one dared to save." His jaw tightened, his gaze flickered, and something dangerous yet fragile cracked through the mask he wore. The sheriff barked out a laugh to cover his nerves. "Enough of this nonsense. You wanted him. He's yours. Don't come crying when he burns your house to the ground." He waved the crowd off, trying to scatter the tension, but no one moved. They wanted to see. They needed to see. The widow turned. "Come," she whispered, and he followed. Through the square, through the narrow streets, past shuttered windows and trembling whispers. The mountain man walked at her side like a shadow she had summoned. No one dared stop them. Doors slammed, curtains dropped, yet every soul inside leaned close to listen. When they reached her small cabin on the edge of town, the widow opened the door and stepped inside. The mountain man paused at the threshold, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He glanced once over his shoulder at the town, then ducked low, and entered. The door shut, and for the first time the people of that settlement were left with silence. Inside, The widow lit a lantern, its glow spilling across the room. She turned to face him. His chains clattered as he shifted, his eyes scanning the space, lingering on the photographs of her late husband, the single rocking chair by the fire, the emptiness that filled every corner. "You gave up your ring," he said, voice still rough. She nodded. "Because it no longer holds life. My husband is gone. The world sees you as a beast, but I see chains, and I know what it is to live bound by loss." For the first time, his hardened expression faltered. A shadow of pain flickered across his face, buried deep but undeniable. He lowered himself onto the floor near the fire, his weight shaking the wooden boards. After a long silence, he spoke again. "They call me monster, killer, devil, but I killed only those who came for me first. They hunted me like an animal. I caged myself in the mountains, until the sheriff's men came with fire and ropes." His fists clenched, the chains biting into his skin, "and now the cage is theirs." The widow knelt near him, her eyes steady. "Then let this be your choice, not theirs. You're free now." The words hung heavy. Freedom. It wasn't something he'd believed in for years. Slowly, he raised his head, staring at her. And there, in the quiet glow of her lantern, the most feared man in the mountains looked less like a beast and more like a broken soul starved of kindness. But outside, fear brewed. The town whispered, argued, threatened. Some said she'd lost her sanity. Others demanded the sheriff take the man back. By nightfall, a group of men gathered, rifles in hand. The pounding came at her door. The widow stood, her heart racing, but she did not falter. She opened the door to find half the town on her porch, torches in their fists, eyes wide with fury. "Hand him over," the sheriff demanded, his hand resting on his gun. "You've set the devil loose, and we won't let him roam free." The widow's voice was steady, but her hands trembled at her sides. "He is no devil. He is mine now. Bought not with fear, but with the last piece of love I had left." The mountain man rose from the floor, towering in the doorway behind her. His presence alone made the men flinch, rifles lowering by instinct. His eyes burned, but not with rage, with a strange calm. He placed one scarred hand on the widow's shoulder, and for the first time, the people saw not a monster, but a man standing beside her, anchored by her courage. The silence stretched, thick as the night, and then, with a voice that carried into every heart, the mountain man spoke. "You caged me, you cursed me, you feared me, but she broke her chains for me. If I am to be beast or man, let it be decided here." The sheriff swallowed, his smirk gone. For the first time, he looked unsure. The widow lifted her chin. Her words were quiet, but sharp as steel. "I gave up my wedding ring for him. That ring was my vow to a past I cannot change. Tonight, it becomes my vow to a future that no cage, no fear, no man can break." The crowd wavered, torn between fear and awe, between the legend they believed and the truth standing before them. And in that moment, silence fell across the mountain town because no one dared to challenge the widow who had traded her love for the most feared man alive. The torchlight flickered across tense faces, every man in the crowd gripping his rifle as though the weight of their fear depended on it. The sheriff's jaw tightened, his pride battling the unease in his eyes. The widow stood unyielding, her frame small against the sea of guns, yet her courage cast a shadow larger than any of them dared admit. The mountain man's hand lingered on her shoulder, steady, anchoring her as much as she anchored him. His gaze swept across the crowdmen who had once hunted him, children of those who whispered his name as a curse. For years they had fed on fear of him, painting him as devil and monster. But now, standing beside the widow who had traded her last treasure to free him, their picture cracked. She gave up her ring. His voice thundered, deep and raw. "The last piece of the man she lost. She broke her chain for me, while you still rattle yours." The words split through the night like lightning. The men flinched, gripping rifles tighter, but not one dared step forward. The sheriff spat in the dirt. "Words don't wash blood from your hands. You think her pity makes you a man. You'll never be one of us." The widow's voice rose then, soft yet sharp, carrying more weight than the sheriff's spark. "He doesn't need to be one of you. He is his own, and he is mine." Her words stunned the square. In that moment, the widow claimed what no one else dared, the soul everyone had condemned. The mountain man turned his head, staring at her, with eyes that had only ever seen chains and shadows. In her, he saw something he had never believed in again: belonging. The sheriff snarled, "Step aside, woman, or we drag him back to the cage." The widow did not move. She lifted her chin, the firelight glinting against her face. "I buried one husband already. I will not bury the truth of this man to satisfy your fear." The torches wavered as the men shifted, doubt eating at their anger. A boy at the edge of the crowd whispered, "Mama, he don't look like no monster." The words spread like cracks through stone. Mothers clutched their children closer, but their eyes softened. Fathers lowered rifles, unsure. The sheriff alone stood rigid, fury burning in his pride. He drew his pistol. "Then you'll die with him." The mountain man moved before anyone could breathe. With a chain-bound arm, he knocked the weapon aside, the shot exploding harmlessly into the night sky. The sheriff stumbled, his power broken, and the rifles lowered fully now. No one raised them again. The crowd parted as the sheriff fled into the shadows, pride shattered. What remained was silence, pure, heavy silence. The widow turned, meeting the mountain man's eyes. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from the weight of truth. "I gave up my ring, but I never gave up my heart. Tonight, I give it to you." His chains fell heavy against the floorboards as he sank to his knees before her. His massive frame bent not by force but by something greater. His voice broke, raw and low, "And tonight, you gave me back my soul." The people, who had come thirsting for blood, now stood frozen in awe. They watched as the widow reached out, touching his scarred face with the gentlest hand. And for the first time, the mountain man closed his eyes, not in rage, not in pain, but in peace. The torches dimmed, the rifles lowered, and one by one the crowd drifted into the night. Their fear scattered like ash in the wind. From that night on, the cage in the town square stood empty, rusted, swallowed by weeds. The story of the mountain man did not fade, but it changed. Longer was he the monster children feared. He became the man the widow had chosen, the man she had freed, not with chains broken by iron, but with a ring given in love. And when people whispered of him, their voices no longer trembled. They spoke with wonder of the widow who stood against an entire town, and the feared man who fell to his knees for her. The mountain had kept its secret long enough. Now it belonged to them both. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and share it with someone who loves powerful tales. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that touches the heart and stirs the soul. Your support means the world. Thank you for watching and being part of our Legacy Ignited family. Stay tuned, because the next story will be even more shocking and unforgettable.